Fall is here and class is back in session. And with an all-new school year comes an all-new season of our podcast, Campus Killings. I'm Dr. Megan Sachs.
And I'm Dr. Amy Schlossberg, and we're the hosts of Campus Killings.
In Season 1, we brought you 20 episodes covering some of the most sinister crimes to take place on or around school campuses, or the cases we discussed had a school-connected theme. From the recent high-profile cases like the November 2022 Moscow, Idaho murders of 4 students,
to older cases like the 1966 murder of Sherry Jo Bates in Riverside, California, a case with possible ties to the infamous Zodiac killer.
We also touched on cases that played a role in changing campus laws in order to better protect students.
In Season 2 of Campus Killings, which debuts on September 16th, 2023, we'll dive into an all-new set of campus-related murder cases.
And as usual, we'll include our analysis of each case as both educators and criminologists.
We hope you'll check out Season 2 of Campus Killings. And don't worry, if you haven't listened to Season 1 yet, all of our episodes are available to binge right now wherever you listen to podcasts.
You're listening to Missing Persons, brought to you by AbJack Entertainment. Be sure to check out some of the other great true crime podcasts from this network, including The Murder in My Family, DNA ID, Zodiac Speaking, Scene of the Crime,
Beyond Bizarre True Crime,
Citizen Detective, and
Campus Killings.
All of these podcasts are available for you to binge on right now, wherever you listen to podcasts. Subscribe where you're listening to this podcast so you don't miss an episode.
The views and opinions expressed by guests on this podcast do not necessarily represent those of the podcast, its creators, or sponsors. If you would like to discuss a missing persons case on this podcast, please be sure to visit missingpersonspodcast.net. This episode may contain unsettling or disturbing subject matter. Listener discretion is advised.
If you'd like to support Missing Persons and get VIP access to things like ad-free listening, early preview episodes, and bonus content of not only this show, but for every other podcast on the AbJack network of indie podcasts, consider subscribing to the show with an AbJack Insider subscription through Apple Podcast. For only $4.99 a month or $49.99 a year, you'll unlock a variety of listener benefits, and you'll be supporting the show in the process. Your support is greatly appreciated.
Welcome to Missing Persons, a podcast dedicated to spreading the word about people who have vanished under mysterious or unexplained circumstances and the family members who are looking for answers. I'm Jess Betancourt.
And I'm Mike Morford. Together, we created this podcast to help give a voice to people who continue to search for their missing loved ones. In some cases, even after decades have gone by. In each episode, you'll hear from Jess giving listeners the backstory and the basic facts of the disappearance.
Then Mike will speak with someone who's intimately connected to the missing person, and his guest will share their story with us. So sit back and enjoy this episode, and who knows, maybe you can help us find someone who's missing. Kenneth Ray Weaver went missing on December 25, 2000, Christmas Day. He was 37 years old. Kenny, as he was called, was born on January 7, 1963. He'd served in the Navy, but when he vanished, was working in the siding industry, installing siding on buildings in the Fort Smith, Arkansas area where he was from. He'd recently been arrested. Sorry, let me do that again. I squeaked. He'd recently been arrested in April 2000 for heroin possession, but was released the following day. Kenny was very close with his mother, Nancy Gibson, his older brother, Randy, and his older sister, Becky Glenn, who is our guest today.
You're listening to Missing Persons, brought to you by AbJack Entertainment. Be sure to check out some of the other great true crime podcasts from this network, including The Murder in My Family, DNA ID, Zodiac Speaking, Scene of the Crime,
Beyond Bizarre True Crime,
Citizen Detective, and
Campus Killings.
All of these podcasts are available for you to binge on right now, wherever you listen to podcasts. Subscribe where you're listening to this podcast so you don't miss an episode.
The views and opinions expressed by guests on this podcast do not necessarily represent those of the podcast, its creators, or sponsors. If you would like to discuss a missing persons case on this podcast, please be sure to visit missingpersonspodcast.net. This episode may contain unsettling or disturbing subject matter. Listener discretion is advised.
If you'd like to support Missing Persons and get VIP access to things like ad-free listening, early preview episodes, and bonus content of not only this show, but for every other podcast on the AbJack network of indie podcasts, consider subscribing to the show with an AbJack Insider subscription through Apple Podcast. For only $4.99 a month or $49.99 a year, you'll unlock a variety of listener benefits, and you'll be supporting the show in the process. Your support is greatly appreciated.
Welcome to Missing Persons, a podcast dedicated to spreading the word about people who have vanished under mysterious or unexplained circumstances and the family members who are looking for answers. I'm Jess Betancourt.
And I'm Mike Morford. Together we created this podcast to help give a voice to people who continue to search for their missing loved ones. In some cases, even after decades have gone by. In each episode, you'll hear from Jess giving listeners the backstory and the basic facts of the disappearance.
Then Mike will speak with someone who's intimately connected to the missing person, and his guest will share their story with us. So sit back and enjoy this episode, and who knows, maybe you can help us find someone who's missing. Kenneth Ray Weaver went missing on December 25th, 2000, Christmas Day. He was 37 years old. Kenny, as he was called, was born on January 7th, 1963. He'd served in the Navy, but when he vanished, was working in the siding industry, installing siding on buildings in the Fort Smith, Arkansas area where he was from. He'd recently been arrested in April 2000 for heroin possession, but was released the following day. Kenny was very close with his mother, Nancy Gibson, his older brother, Randy, and his older sister, Becky Glenn, who is our guest today. In December 2000, Kenny had recently recuperated from back surgery for a bulged disc by staying at his mom, Nancy's house in Pocola, Oklahoma. He was in the process of moving into his own apartment on Georgia Place in Pocola, Oklahoma, with a roommate, Roger Norman. On Christmas Day, 2000, Kenny was expected at his mom Nancy's house for the annual holiday celebration. It took the family a few days to realize that Kenny was missing. It wasn't uncommon for him to be out of touch for a few days, and on occasion, he wouldn't show up to a planned family gathering, but he would always call within a few days to explain. This time was different. The family contacted Kenny's new roommate, Roger. Roger said that on Christmas morning, at Kenny's request, he had driven Kenny to the trailer home of another friend, Bruce B., in Pocola, Oklahoma. However, another friend, Wesley Toller, came forward and told the family the following. At the end of 2000, he and his wife saw Kenny sitting on the stoop of Bruce's trailer home, either on Christmas Day or Christmas Eve. He couldn't recall which. They invited Kenny inside their home to warm up and wait as Bruce was in Fort Coffee. Kenny asked the Tollers if they could drive him to an apartment where he was supposed to meet some people, behind Jay's Night Owl in Fort Smith, Arkansas. Kenny told Wesley that he owed two of the guys some money. Specifically, he owed money for pills to two guys from Missouri who were at the apartment with people Kenny knew named Crazy Phil, William Price, a.k.a. Pill Bill, who has since died in prison, and Pill Bill's girlfriend. Wesley did drive Kenny to Fort Smith, Arkansas, right across the state line, and asked if he would be all right being dropped off at this apartment. Kenny said yes, and that was the last time anyone saw or heard from him. When they could not reach Kenny, his mother Nancy and sister Becky tried to report Kenny missing to the police in January 2001. Pocola, Oklahoma police told the family that because Kenny was a citizen of Arkansas with an Arkansas driver's license, Oklahoma police did not have jurisdiction. Yet, Fort Smith, Arkansas police said the case belonged with the Oklahoma authorities because Kenny now lived there with his roommate Roger. It took the family 4.5 years to get a law enforcement agency to take on the case. Meanwhile, Becky, Nancy, and Kenny's brother Randy had spent the 4.5 years digging into information on Kenny's disappearance. They unearthed all kinds of stories, rumors, and gossip about what happened to Kenny. Becky learned more about what Wesley had told her about Kenny owing two guys from Missouri for pills. She heard that the two Missouri guys had killed Kenny over a debt for prescription drugs. She learned from others that Kenny had a prescription bottle with the name Philip Bliss on it, who may or may not have been the guy with the disturbing nickname, Crazy Phil. Finally, in October 2005, Fort Smith Police Sergeant Levi Risley took up the case. He told Becky that he'd heard that Kenny was seen tied up in the back of a pickup in Pocola and was going to be taken to Arkansas. But he also heard that Kenny was beaten to death in an apartment in Fort Smith over a small amount of money. Because Sergeant Risley came to believe that foul play was involved in what happened to Kenny, finally the Pocola Police Department opened a missing persons investigation after constant pressure from the family. Kenny was finally entered into NCIC on October 14, 2005. For unknown reasons, he was removed from NCIC in 2008 and then re-entered in 2011 after the family discovered the delisting. Eric Helms, the former Pocola police chief and now an investigator for the Sequoia County DA's office, told Becky that he suspects that Bruce B., the owner of the trailer where Kenny asked to be dropped off, was involved in what happened to Kenny, along with violent criminal brothers and associates of Bruce's named Charlie and Michael Ruel. He said that in his investigation, he'd learned that Kenny had indeed been seen on Bruce's front porch, but rather than being driven to Fort Smith, he was seen walking down the street and then getting into a blue Nissan 280Z. Bruce B. also reportedly owned a 1985 Ford shortbed pickup that went missing after Kenny vanished. Bruce told police he heard Kenny had been killed over a drug debt. As you can hear, there is a significant amount of information swirling around Kenny's disappearance. The challenge is sorting through it all and determining what elements are unfounded and what contain a kernel of truth. But they all lead to the same tragic conclusion. It's very likely that Kenneth Weaver is deceased and quite possibly was the victim of a homicide. Kenny's case is now being worked by Captain Wayne Barnett of the Pocola Police. He addressed the confusing jurisdictional dispute and the ghoulish rumors with CNN. Quote, "The flow of information on a case that goes back and forth across the state lines sometimes gets lost in the shuffle, and that's exactly what happened in this case," he said. Leads that range from he left on his own to go somewhere else to where he was done harm to him because of a drug debt that he possibly could have owed, or that somebody disposed of his body. Kenny's mother, Nancy, told the Arkansas Democrat-Gazette, quote, "If he's alive and gone, it's his business. We just want to know he's okay. If he was murdered, then we want his murderer to pay the price." Becky Glenn has acknowledged that her brother is likely deceased. She said, quote, "Your head tells you that after this long he's not here, but your heart doesn't believe it." The family has provided DNA to the authorities to assist in identification if any remains are found. Kenny is also listed in NamUs. Becky started the Missing Kenneth Ray Weaver Facebook page in March 2019 to raise awareness about his case. Kenneth Ray Weaver is 5 foot 8 inches tall and weighs 165 pounds. He's a Caucasian male with brown hair and blue eyes. He wears eyeglasses with gold wire frames and smoke-tinted lenses. He has a scar extending from the right side of his chin to his neck and a 1 to 1.5 inch surgical scar on his lower back near his spine from his back surgery. If you know anything about his disappearance, please call the Pocola Police Department at 918-436-2476 and ask for Captain Wayne Barnett. Mike Morford sat down with Becky Glenn, Kenneth Weaver's sister, to talk about her brother's case. That conversation's coming up after a word from our sponsors.
Welcome to Missing Persons, Becky. I want to thank you for coming on to discuss your brother Kenny's case.
Thanks, Mike.
I'm happy to have you here. I know you've been searching for answers for years now, 23 years, a very long time, when you're looking for a loved one. Before we get into the details surrounding Kenny's disappearance, can you tell us a bit about your brother himself and his background and what was going on in his life when he went missing?
He went missing. We lost our father in 1975. Kenny was, I think, 12 at the time. So we lost Dad pretty early. Kenny became troubled after that. He developed a drug problem. He had just had surgery. He went missing in December of 2000. And I think sometime in the summer of 2000, he had back surgery and stayed with my mom. and was in the process of moving to an apartment with a buddy of his when he went missing. Kenny loved the water. Fishing, God, he loved going fishing, swimming. He was a fish. He loved being in the water, being around the water. He was funny. He was sometimes could be reserved. But we all loved him. He would come to family get-togethers. At times he wouldn't show up with no phone call or anything, but we always heard from him shortly thereafter. Somebody had car trouble and he couldn't get a ride or whatever. But for him not to have shown up and for us not to have heard from him within a short time after Christmas Day when he was supposed to be there was very unusual. And we started looking to find him because, we realized a lot of us hadn't talked to him in a while. And so we started trying to find him and realized that no one had seen him since he was supposed to have been dropped off by his new roommate at another buddy's house. And that's when we realized that something was wrong.
So Kenny there were times where he might not show up for something, but he didn't disappear for long stretches of the time without talking to people. That wasn't normal.
No. We always, he, like I said, if he was supposed to be at Mom's house at Christmas, like he was supposed to have been, if he didn't make it, we would have heard from him usually during the following week saying, well, I couldn't get a ride, or my car broke down and I couldn't get there. We always heard from him, and never went more than a couple of weeks without anybody having talked to Kenny. And all of a sudden we realized, that no one had heard from Kenny. No one had seen Kenny. No one really could give us anything. The roommate said he dropped Kenny off at another buddy's house. We had no proof of that. We had to go, by what he told us. And then when we started looking and realizing that there wasn't anything going on, or no one had talked to him or heard from him, then we knew we had an issue going on, and Mom started trying to report him as missing, and the police departments, Oklahoma would tell us it was Arkansas's case. Arkansas would tell us it was Oklahoma's, and nobody would even file a missing persons report for her. That went on for almost 5 years. It took us 5 years to get him listed as missing, not because we didn't try, but because the two police departments in the two states wouldn't file a report.
That sounds very frustrating to get the runaround. It's telling you it's the other place, and that place telling you now you got to go back to that place.
Right. He had Arkansas driver's license at the time of his disappearance, and he had was in the process of moving into an apartment in Poto, Oklahoma. So that's why Oklahoma would say, no, it's Arkansas's case because he has Arkansas driver's license. And Arkansas would say, no, it's Oklahoma's case because he supposedly disappeared from a little town called Pocola, Oklahoma, which was where the buddy lived that he was dropped off at, which we found out several years later that he had been dropped off there, but that someone else had taken him back into Arkansas that same day. But we found that out back in, I think it was 2017, 2018, when I started his Facebook page is when I found that information out.
So a lot of what you went on early on was based on, correct me if I'm wrong, this roommate, Roger Norman, is that correct?
That is correct.
Okay. And so what was Roger's story right from the beginning?
He said that he dropped Kenny off at a guy named Bruce Bernard's house, and that he just left him there. It was in the wintertime. Of course, it was Christmas. It was cold. Kenny had on a jean jacket. Bruce was not home, but Roger just left him on the front porch and drove off. Apparently, Roger and Kenny had a bit of a falling out, but we've never gotten any of Kenny's clothing. Mom had given them some household items for their apartment. We never got any of that stuff back. What happened to it, we don't know. I have spoken with Roger myself a couple of times through Messenger on Facebook. I finally cut contact with him because he's got some issues, and I just decided that it was safer for me just to walk away from him. He wanted to meet me somewhere, just the two of us, and I refused to do that. I couldn't get the police to go and meet him because I was going to set up the appointment and have another, have someone go in my place. But I couldn't get law enforcement to do that. So.
And you just didn't feel safe doing it?
No. These people have all, I've never had a drug issue. I've never dealt with that world. And it was just, from what the police officers were telling me and from what, my husband and my family's telling me, it was safer if I didn't have contact with him. And then after I had the conversations with him through Facebook, I realized that they were correct. He is, the longer you talk to him, the crazier he got.
And that's,
or the crazier sounding he got anyway.
Yeah. And the issue, I think, anytime you're dealing in that world, you're dealing with people that can be, I don't know what the right word would be, unpredictable, maybe. You don't know what you're going to run into. You don't know if any of them have a criminal history. So, I mean, I certainly can't blame you for being cautious and not wanting to do that. But his story is basically what you had to go on. He's dropped off there, according to Roger.
Correct.
Then you mentioned that you found out that later from there, though, he got taken back to Arkansas. How did you find that out? And who did he supposedly go back there with?
I started a Facebook page for Kenny. I believe it was either in 2018, 2019. Actually, it was in 2019. I set up a Facebook, March 10th of 2019. I created a Missing Kenneth Ray Weaver Facebook page. And I sent friend requests to anybody's name that had come up that I'd seen in Kenny's case. And one of them was a gentleman named Wesley Toller. He had moved to the East Coast. I sent him a friend's request. He responded back immediately. I mean, within 10 minutes, I had a response back from him. He was driving and wanted to know if he could call me. I didn't know if I wanted to give him my personal cell phone number, but I made the decision to do that because I can change phone numbers if I need to. And he told me that he and his wife had come home and found Kenny sitting on Bruce's front porch. And they had him come, because they knew Kenny as well, and had Kenny come into their house to warm up because he was freezing. And while they were there, they were getting ready to go out to dinner. And they said it could have been Christmas Eve. It could have been Christmas Day. And we think it was Christmas Eve because we don't think the restaurant they were going to was open on Christmas Day. So they took him into Fort Smith and dropped him off at an apartment over in an area by where we grew up at in Fort Smith. I went to the DA in Fort Smith and talked to them and told them what I had heard, and that this guy Wesley would talk to anybody that was April of 2019. I went to the DA, and he said he had talked to anybody that they wanted to to bring in, that he had talked to any of them. They did not talk to Wesley. Finally, I kind of pushed them, and one of the cops, I had Wesley call one of the cops, and he told them what had happened and what had gone on. He told me who was at the apartment. I gave that information to the law enforcement. They've never looked into it. Kenny it took us 5 years to get Kenny listed, almost 5 years to get Kenny in NCIC. He's been taken out three times. So we've had to put him in 4 times. Somebody keeps taking him out of the system.
Do you know
who that is? Another issue we're having.
Who would do that, and why do they keep doing that?
The first time was an officer in Pocola, which is where Kenny's officially listed as missing from. Don't know why. Nobody would ever tell me. I think somebody messed up and gave me that person's name. She was dispatcher for Pocola Police Department. He was taken out. It took us until October of 2005 to get Kenny listed. And then I found out he was out in 2011. A cop in Fort Smith that had been trying to help us, called, wanted to know if I'd found Kenny. And I said, well, no, I would have called you if I had. I said, what's up? And he said he was just looking in the computer at NCIC and found out that Kenny had been removed in January of 2008. So from October of 2005 to January of 2008, he was listed as missing. And then from January of 2008 until February of 2011, when we found out he wasn't in there any longer, anybody that had run, if anybody had come across and run anything, they never would have known that Kenny was missing because he wasn't there. I got him back in the system and then found out a few years later that he had been taken out again, and got him back in. And then just recently he was removed for a third time. And so I had to go back through and get him listed for the fourth time. So and I can't find out who took him out the other times. They won't tell me.
It's frustrating though, because you're expecting him to be in that system in case somebody, runs his name or has a reason to check on him and doesn't see him in there.
If they're looking at, if they found, God forbid, they found a body that they can't identify or whatever, if he's not in that system, they have no idea that he's missing. So they can't even attempt to match to let us know, or even, say, okay, well, maybe this could be him. We need to rule him out. So for all those years that he's been out, we didn't have that, thinking that we did have that protection. We didn't.
So the best lead you have as to where Kenny went was provided by this Wesley guy. And according to you, it sounds like Wesley was believable and willing to cooperate, but the police never took him up on the offer of questioning him or talking to him anymore.
Correct. Like I said, he did talk to one officer in Fort Smith, that the DA said that they would help us, but they didn't do anything. And he did call and talk to the guy, the officer there in Fort Smith, only because I called Wesley, gave Wesley his number and had Wesley call him. They never would call him. I can't get them to talk to Roger Norman. They talked to Roger in 2005 when Kenny was originally, we've got the official report that he was missing. They talked to Roger, and Roger, when he contacted me, when I set up the Facebook page, told me that he had not told them everything, and that's why he wanted to meet me. And I told the police officer, the police in Pocola, I told him that he's saying he did not tell you everything. And I also told Fort Smith. And the conversation with the cops were, well, we talked to him in 2005, and he said this. And I'm like, I'm aware of that. But he told me in 2019 that he had not told y'all everything, and y'all need to re-talk to him. Well, we talked to him in 2005. I know you talked to him in 2005. He said he didn't tell you everything. You need to go back and re-talk to him. I couldn't get it through their heads that he had lied to them, and they didn't want to admit it, that they had been lied to and they'd bought it. It's constantly, not only am I looking for my brother, but I'm fighting law enforcement, and I'm having to fight two states because our Fort Smith is on the border of Arkansas and Oklahoma. So I'm fighting Oklahoma law enforcement and I'm fighting Arkansas law enforcement to try to get them to do anything. I've been told by the police at the time, the police chief in the town where Kenny was officially missing from, that they weren't going to do anything in his case. The only way they were going to get information was if they got a deathbed confession. And yet they've not talked to anyone. There's no official reports where they've talked to anybody, is what I've been told. I met with them in July of this year at a conference in Benton, Arkansas, that Attorney General's office does here. And I also got a special agent here in Arkansas from the FBI to talk with us. And I had found out that one of the people we've been talking to has been diagnosed with cancer. And I said, do we have an official statement from him? Because, anything can happen and we're all getting older. It's been 23 years. And I said, do we have a statement from him? No. Do you think we should get one? Do we have a statement from Bruce? No. Do you think we should get an official statement from him? Do we have official statement from Roger? No. Do you think we might want to get one? It's like they've done none of these things. And these are just common sense things that you think that they would have done already.
Yeah, it shouldn't have to be you telling them how to do stuff. I mean, it does seem pretty common sense to just collect statements, question people, and not, just sit back and hope that somebody comes forward with a, confession or some kind of proof.
Exactly.
Here's what solves the case and lays it on their desk. You think they would go out and do some actual digging, which I know you did for that 5 years. You didn't sit around waiting. You did some digging, and I know you came across a lot of troubling rumors and things. What kind of things did you?
I had heard that my brother had been killed. And of course, I called the FBI to talk to them about it because we are on the border. And the FBI, when I talked to them, told me to find out where it happened, how it happened, when it happened, and who did it, and they'd look into it. And I was just like, okay.
So they wanted you to solve the case.
That's not going to go anywhere.
Yeah, that's not good.
Yeah. We've heard that Kenny had been, I had heard at one point that Kenny had been killed, and there had been, that his body had been cremated. Okay. I'm thinking, we're talking rural area. So I'm thinking, bonfire out in the field. Found out there's possibly a crematorium involved. There's a mortician that they questioned at one point while he was in jail, but they didn't get anything from him. All he wanted to know was who brought his name up because he was due to get out of prison in 3 weeks. But they never went back and talked to him. There is, I've heard that he's possibly out on some land in a well that we're working on now, trying to get searched 23 years later. One of the police chiefs did try to get permission from the landowner to put the camera down in the well, and it was refused. I don't understand why, but the landowner wouldn't let him on the property. But we're working on now I've got someone else helping me that's going to try to get permission to go onto the land and see if we can't search the well. We're also looking to see if there is a connection. There is a mortuary in this area that was used by some criminals, that was set up by some criminals, and they used it to dispose of bodies. We're trying to see if Kenny has any connection with that mortuary. The same group that's trying to get the well searched is looking at that as well. You hear these god awful stories, and it's they're hard to hear. I'm the official I'm the one that did the official report because I didn't want my mother having to hear some of these stories. She doesn't need to hear that about her baby son. So I listen to all the things that they find out. And then my brother, I've got another brother, he and I discuss everything. We're a blended family. So Kenny's got 3 stepsisters and a stepbrother. And we're all, I'm getting, they'll say, well, have you, maybe if we talk to this person, I now have a prepaid phone that I use when I call people that I shouldn't have to call. So I don't have to use my personal phone. Because I don't want these people to be able to find me because I don't know these people. So not only do you have, not only am I trying to find my brother, but I'm trying to keep everybody involved safe because you don't know what these people will do.
It's got to be tough hearing all these different rumors and terrible things and not know what story, if any of them, are true. It sounds like it would have you going in a lot of different directions, though.
It does. Like I said, I have talked to people I never should have had to talk to. But to try to find my brother, I guess I'm going to have to. And it's hard. I mean, the things you hear, they make you sick, they make you angry. But you have to follow up on them. I was told back in September of last year that that by Fort Smith cop, that they do think Kenny had been killed, that they think that his body had been cremated, and that we'll never get a body back, and that the person that ran the crematorium was deceased, and that that was it. And I'm like, okay, well, that may be what I have to accept, that we won't get it, we won't get him back, but who killed him? What, but they were like, it's like they're done. The case is, as far as they were saying, was pretty much, well, the case is taken care of, because we know we're not going to find Kenny, so therefore we don't have to look anymore. But it's like, yeah, you may have found out what happened to the body, but who murdered him? Who took his body to this crematorium? The owner of the crematorium was deceased, but what about people that ran the crematorium? Who did the cremation? You would think there would have to be records every time the crematorium was fired up. I mean, I would think there would be some kind of record. Somebody would know when they did those kind of things, but they didn't have any answers for me. It's like, you're only looking at half the picture. You've got to look at the whole thing, and they just don't understand that that I'm not wanting to accept the fact. They said, well, you just don't want to accept the fact your brother's deceased. Okay, after 23 years, I know my brother, and I know my brother is no longer with us, or somebody would have talked to him, somebody would have seen him. So I've accepted the fact that he is no longer with us, but I also want whoever took Kenny's life to pay for it. And if his body was cremated, that is a real, that's something we have to accept, and I can do that. But give me all the facts, not just a piece, so that you can just put the case in a file and go away.
Yeah, yeah. And there was one other clue, or one other lead I wanted to specifically ask you about. I saw a mention of someone named Crazy Phil that had a story that 2 Missouri guys had killed Kenny over a debt for prescription pills, and then you learned from other people that Kenny had a prescription bottle with the name Philip Bliss on it.
That's
Is
correct.
that Crazy Phil, and what has his story added up at all? What's his story?
Nobody will tell me if that was Philip Bliss's street name. I've been told by 2 different law enforcement agencies that Philip Bliss was nuts from the drugs. Drugs had pretty much fried his brain. So I'm assuming that Crazy Phil is Philip Bliss. I don't know if Philip Bliss is still alive or not. He had some really major medical issues. The cops haven't talked to him. Well, I take that back. Fort Smith did. The first guy who helped me get the police report, Detective Leroy Risley, he talked to Philip Bliss and said that he was nuts. So I'm assuming that that's him. I don't know for sure. I can't get the regular police to even figure out who who these guys are from Missouri. I've given them a couple of names of some guys that lived in the neighborhood where we grew up, that they had moved to Missouri, and they were into selling drugs at the time. And no one, they won't go and talk to them. I found one of them on Facebook. One of them didn't have a Facebook page, but they, it's like they won't do anything. And of course, Pocola is a very small police department in Oklahoma. They don't have the money to run around everywhere. In July, I did get them to talk to the FBI, and they agreed to let the FBI help them. I was also told that the Oklahoma State Bureau of Investigation is going to provide them some assistance, and they can go and talk to some of these people. But when I've called them, that was middle of July, and I called them a couple of weeks ago. They still haven't done anything. So that's another thing. They'll tell me they're going, they'll tell me what I want to hear, and then they don't follow through, and I just have to stay on top of them.
Well, it sounds very frustrating that you're having to do a lot of the legwork here.
It was the night of the awful discovery. The apartment was dark. The faint coppery scent of blood hung in the air.
I remember telling the boys, don't touch anything. We don't know what's happened here.
I'm Keith Morrison, and this is Murder in Apartment 12, our new podcast from Dateline. It's a story about a local beauty queen who'd been keeping secrets. It's about gossip, public opinion, and a tortured search for a killer.
I think they've got the wrong guy.
To listen to the latest episodes each week completely free, just search Murder in Apartment 12 wherever you get your podcasts.
I know that you earlier mentioned about Kenny's case being pulled and you having to put it back in the system. Has his case been entered into NamUs in case there are remains found? Okay. So
yes,
that's
his
good.
name is in NamUs. It's been in NamUs. It's never come out of NamUs. It's been in NamUs since 2006 or 7, I think, is when we got him in there. And my mom's, mine, and my brother's DNA is on record. We did do that, so that if they do find anything, because I got contacted by a coroner out of California, who was they'd found a skeletal remains, and they wanted to find out. They said the time frame would have covered Kenny, so they wanted to run some DNA, and they wanted to know if we had dental records. And I said, no, I don't have dental records, but I'll, he was in the military. I'll work on getting them for you. So sent the forms off to the military explaining that, he had been missing, and gave them the police department's address, phone number, the police chief's name, where, when he had been missing, the case number, all that stuff. I get a letter back from our government stating that they can't release the information until he signs the form.
Yeah.
So I gave the form to another detective and said, here, can you try to get a copy, because they won't give me anything. And he was finally able to get the dental records. So I've got his dental records. I now have it. I got a congressman to help me get his full military record, so I don't have to go through that process again. So I've dug up everything that I can come up with. I've talked to people, like I said, I shouldn't have to. I feel like most of the stuff that they've gotten from me, because I can't get them to do their jobs.
That's gotta be frustrating.
It's very frustrating.
Well, you've done a really good job advocating for Kenny's case and trying to get the word out there. You mentioned doing social media stuff. Tell us again about the Facebook page and what it's called and what's on there, what people can take away from it if they visit it.
It's Missing Kenneth Ray Weaver. I've started it in 2019. If you have any clues, even if there's something that went on back in the 2000s, or even 1998 forward, anything that you know of that Kenny was up to, or that might have happened to him, you can give us messages through there. We have a Gmail account, missingkennethrayweaver@gmail.com, that I monitor myself. I'm the only one who has access to it. They can contact us through there. They can contact Pocola Police Department. Message me through Messenger, and I respond to any information that we've gotten. We've had a few people come in and give us information and they have talked to the police departments. We're open to anything on the page. I keep up with, it's been over 8,000 days, almost 9,000 days now that we've not seen or heard from Kenny. He's got, great nieces and nephews that he's never met. We've lost our stepdad since he's been gone. We've lost several of Kenny's favorite aunts and uncles. There's a lot that has been missed out on. I don't suspect that he is still with us. God, I would love for me to be proved wrong on that one. But this is not something Kenny would do. He would not hurt Mom this way if he was still around.
So, I mean, it's been almost a quarter century since Kenny vanished.
Correct.
Do you still hold out hope? Are you hopeful that somehow, some way you're going to get answers? And after so long, how important is it to get those answers and see, as you mentioned, somebody held accountable?
I still hope, because I'm not giving up. That's just not my nature. I'm in it until, the good Lord calls me home. I will continue to look for Kenny, and until the day I leave this earth, I'm not ever going to give up hope on finding him. People that have hurt, that hurt Kenny, they may not still be around to pay the price, but we'll know what happened to Kenny. His nieces and nephews and brothers and sisters will all know that, he didn't leave of his own free will, which is not Kenny either. He, like I said, he's just not, that wasn't Kenny's nature. And we'll all have that you can't really call it closure, but we'll all know what happened to Kenny, because the not knowing is the hardest. You don't want to think that he's gone, but then, you have this heat wave. It's like, God, is he somewhere where he can get cooled off if he's still around? Or there's a blizzard and it's really super cold, and you're like, God, is there someplace he can go to get warm if he's, if he's living on the streets or something, and even though your mind tells you that he's no longer here, your heart still wants to believe there's that little tiny bit of hope, because we haven't found his body. And and you worry about him, and then you worry, well, what about people that hurt him? Why are they getting to be out there living their life when Kenny doesn't have that option, and it was taken from him? So you have to live with all those thoughts that go through your mind, and you hear all the horror stories of things that the police think may have happened, and you've got those horror stories in your head, and then your brain comes up with more horror stories. So it's just a constant cycle. And I find myself constantly thinking, who else do we need to talk to? Where do we need to go? We can't. There's really nowhere to go to search. He didn't have a vehicle, so I know he didn't run off into a pond somewhere, and we can find his car and find him. That's not an option. And you start, well, who was he hanging out with? Who did he talk to? Who have I missed? And then, then you start feeling like a failure because you haven't been able to find him after all this time. You've done everything you know to do, and you can't find him still.
Well, definitely don't give up the fight. It sounds like you're determined and going to stick with it, and we'll help you get the word out that his case is still unsolved and you're still looking for him.
That's awesome. Thank you.
Well, thank you so much for coming on and discussing Kenny's case with us. And, I wish you luck finding answers that your family deserves.
Well, thank you for giving us the opportunity. We really appreciate it.
We hope you enjoyed this episode of Missing Persons. If you can provide any information to help solve the case we discussed in this episode, please contact the appropriate authorities.
Just a heads up to those of you that have supported us on Patreon. Your patronage is appreciated, but effective September 30th, 2023, we'll no longer be publishing new content on Patreon for Missing Persons, and the option to support the show on that platform will be turned off. If you're interested in supporting the show and would like to get ad-free listening to every episode of not only Missing Persons, but every other show on the AbJack network of podcast, you can do all of that with an AbJack Insider subscription through Apple Podcast. Your subscription will also give you things like early access to episodes and to bonus content for all the shows network-wide for only $4.99 a month, and you can start with a free trial. Head over to Apple Podcast and search for our show Missing Persons, or for AbJack, and you'll find more information. We'll also leave a link in the show notes. Thanks to everyone for their support. It goes a long way to bringing you these stories in every episode. If you enjoy this podcast, please take a moment to tell your friends about Missing Persons and invite them to listen to the show. Word of mouth will help us grow and bring these cases to a larger audience. You can also help us by taking a moment to rate and review Missing Persons on the platform you're listening to us now on. Just a reminder that new episodes of Missing Persons air every other Saturday. If you want to find us on social media, we're on Facebook at facebook.com/missingpersonspod, We're also on Twitter with the handle @missing_pod. And of course, you can find us and contact us through our website, missingpersonspodcast.com. On behalf of Jess Betancourt, this is Mike Morford saying thanks, and we'll see you next time on Missing Persons.